Hey gang, welcome to Finally Garage. I'm Mike, and today we are going to continue removing the mechanisms from the doors and finally get to the fun stuff, removing the dash. So, enough talk, let's rock. Well, that's the worst catchphrase ever. Anyway, let's get started. Ow! So I still have some, stuff to do up on the roof here. A little bit of headliner still and visors and rear view mirror. But I thought I'd jump into something a little more fun for the moment, just because I want to. So at first you'll see me do some prying on that center cover there. And I gave up on that after a few minutes because I was afraid of damaging it. All the instructions for all the different wheels for the 67 GTO said that should just pop off, but didn't seem too willing to come off. So then I was looking at those three spokes, around the wheel, and there's a kind of a silver cover on each of them, and I noticed they were held in with a couple screws. So I thought, I better try and take those off first and see if maybe that has something to do with taking the center cap off. And after a couple minutes of playing around with those spokes, getting them loose, the cap seemed looser as well. And so I went ahead and just pried it off. learn something new every time I work on this car. Today's lesson: do the nastiest, grossest part of the job at the end of your day. And that's it for me today. For you, I'll be back in about a minute. For me, it'll be tomorrow morning, and we'll start working on that dashboard. All right, gang. Well, it's a few days later. I jumped off and worked a couple of side projects, and I'm back to the front side of this interior. The last video, I realized, was a lot of sort of watching me fiddle around and get this dash out, but not really showing details. So I just kind of wanted to touch base on a little bit about what I was doing. The dash itself, or this dash panel, I should say, was just held in by 4 bolts on the bottom, and then 4 bolts up in, or 5 bolts up in this bezel, and then one
bolt, one bracket coming off of this speedometer had a bolt holding it in as well, the speedometer gauge, that was structurally, that was pretty much all that was holding it in. At one point I thought the radio might be holding it in as well, so I did, I thought maybe there was a bunch of connectivity on that radio, and so I pulled the radio bezels off, and it turned out it wasn't. I mean, there was just like one bolt. I believe there was just one bolt in the back holding the back of the radio on. So I could have just undone that and pulled it out with the radio. But that radio is big and heavy, and probably was a good thing to have pulled it off anyway, removed it. Otherwise, most of what you saw me doing was just fiddling around with getting electrical connectors off the back. And there wasn't anything, what do they say? It's wasn't anything too complicated about it. They say it's simple, not easy. All these connectors, pull off of there. There's the ignition connector was a real booger, and then this light connector, the lighting switch connector, was also a pain, but none of them came off easily. They'd all been on there for many, many years, and they, they didn't want to come off. But they all ultimately did. Just took a lot of wrestling and knuckle busting and cursing. So, and then the one other thing that really was a pain in the butt was, this is if you look, here's the heater control, right, for the vents and everything like that. And on the back, there's this bracketry system, right? There's all these, brackets, so you can kind of see, moving back and forth. And they're cable controlled. So the cables, and I'll show you a picture of those, but the cables mount to these spots. They anchor down to these spots, and then they just have a little loop that jumps onto these little low points here. And so the actual plastic part of the cable, the end of the cable, anchors here, and then this, the metal cable, actual cable, is what moves these. Pretty simple system, except that these screws, or these nuts, these bolts actually, these little bolts, were very difficult to get to with a wrench. When this was all mounted in, there was just no space that I could figure out how to get up in there. It was just a pain. And so what I worked on first was getting all the other connections off first, so that I could kind of leverage out the dash and have a little more room to get my hand up there, get these levers moved, to the exact spot that allowed me access to those little bolts. So that was really the gist of it, the pain. And maybe I'll find out that it would have been more efficient to remove those cables. Instead of removing them from this front mechanism, it might have been more efficient to remove them at the other end where they connect to the venting system. And you'll see that as I remove those vents from the actual heater box and everything from under the dash. Maybe that would have been the way to go. But just looking at it, those didn't look very easy to access either. Anyway, ultimately I got it done. Again, I said with a little bit of frustration and a lot of swearing. So that's the dash. Now, the dash panel.